And now, Fastened Like Nails with Dr. Mark Hamby.
Welcome to another Fastened Like Nails. I'm Mark Hamby, and in the studio with me again today is Molly Mayo. Molly,
Hi.
Thanks for being here as my co-host today.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, Molly, we're going to go through the book of Jeremiah. We're going to be in chapter 17. We're going to go through an obscure verse that recently came upon, and we're going to come upon a verse that we're extremely familiar with, and we're going to see how those two verses connect and what they mean, because this passage, this chapter in Jeremiah, is significantly appropriate for our time, in our day and age. Let's see what happens here. Have you ever read the book of Jeremiah?
I have.
Jeremiah is one of my favorite books. How about yours?
I haven't spent a lot of time there, though, no.
It's, he's the weeping prophet. He wrote Lamentations as well. In fact, if there's anyone listening today that is looking for counseling, I would say read the book of Lamentations before you go to counseling. I think Lamentations will save people a lot of money. It's God causing grief. When you get to chapter 3, God causes grief so that we might have hope.
Michael Card actually did a study. It was called Sacred Sorrow is the name of the book, and he kind of unpacks Jeremiah's life and the writing of Lamentations. That was really powerful for me this past year, because it kind of really unpacks what that looked like for him and how we as a culture don't really know how to process grief, or when we go through stuff, we don't know what to do with that. And so sometimes we can make God unattainable. But he was just talking about how genuine and real and broken a lot of the people in the Bible were: Jeremiah, David, Jesus, and Job. And so that was one that really hit me. Peter,
a lot of the women that follow Jesus, extremely broken people, God raises up to make us whole. You know what's interesting about Jeremiah is that he is the one prophet that God raises up to tell the king that, you're evil and that you're going to be judged. And Jeremiah's like, if I tell the king this, he's going to kill me. And God's like, do what I tell you to do, and he goes there, and what happens? He pays an awful price for it. He ends up getting put in a pit of like a sewer, and then they drop down, pieces of bread, and they drop down. He basically is eating sewer water while he's down there. He becomes so thin that in order to get him out of that, they have to put soft cloths under his arms, or his flesh would have ripped off. So he's extremely emaciated. And he's kind of like wondering, like, God, I obeyed your voice, and this is what I get for it? And God uses the prophet Jeremiah, what he goes through, as a parallel to what Israel is like. And so Israel is going through this incredible backsliding condition. When you get to chapter 17, up to this point, God is rebuking them and telling them that they're going to get judged. They're going to another nation is going to come and take them over.
Are they listening?
They're not only are they not listening, they're speaking back to God and saying, like, how have we disobeyed you? When have we heard your word? What prophet did you send to tell us these things?
Oh, yikes.
And God's been telling them all along, but they don't think it's for them.
Oh, whoa.
They see themselves as righteous, especially in light of the things and practices that they were involved in, like sacrificing babies on the altars of Baal and Asherah, on the altars of Molech.
How did they get to that? Because this is like God's chosen people, right?
Yeah.
So how did they get to that point?
One word. You ready?
Yeah.
Idolatry. 1 John ends his book, this fascinating prophecy of what the church is supposed to be like. And he tells the church, number one, you have to believe that Jesus came in the flesh, that he died for you, that he loves you, that he will hear you, and that if you walk in the light as he's in the light, you'll have fellowship one with another and with God and his Son, Jesus Christ. And John sets this whole story up to say, in 1 John, to say this: if you're a real believer, then one of the things that you will have, the characteristics of being a real believer, is that you're going to have fellowship with the Father, with the Son, and with one another. And he says, if that's not happening, if you're resisting, if you don't enjoy fellowshipping with real believers, if your conversation is not on things above, then that should be suspect. You should be, I like what Paul says in Corinthians. examine yourself, test yourself, see whether or not you're really in the faith. And then he asks this question, do you not know that Jesus Christ really lives in you? And if Jesus Christ really lives in you, 3 things are going to happen. Four main things. You're going to have fellowship with God the Father and God the Son and with one another, and you're going to admit that you're a sinner and that you need to walk in the light. You're not going to hide your sin. You're not going to keep yourself, behind a wall. You're going to be willing to walk in the light because you don't want darkness to be the characteristic of your life. And so John writes this amazing book, and he writes the first chapter, and then he gets to the final chapter in chapter 5, and he says, brethren, if you're really a believer, then you're going to love one another. But if you hate your brother, then you're a liar, and the love of God isn't in you. And then he gets to the very end, and he says, and this is one more characteristic of being a real believer, that if you ask anything according to his will, he hears you. And you will have the confidence to know that if he hears you, you will receive the entreaties that you've been asking of him.
Wow.
And that you will actually start having answers to prayer. Molly, what was this week like?
A miracle.
Prayer, answers to prayer all week long, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Any particular one that you can think of?
Probably there were a lot of them, a lot. But I think the top 2 were, one, we are recording. So this week we were recording Shipwrecked. It was Lamplighter Theater Live, and we had not only 6 parts to do in 2 days, but one of our actors was leaving at 6 o'clock on the second day. And so this was one of our main characters, Alex. And so we're recording 5 and waiting on 6. 6 is still being written. And
that's where I come in.
We just start praying like crazy. And I turned to the students behind us, and I was just like, just pray. And so they're like, we're just soaking this thing in prayer. And we have people who are like we sent out a prayer letter, and we've got amazing
God. I
people
didn't know that.
I think we did.
Oh, if that happened, that would explain what happened in my office.
Yeah.
Because, Molly, I was just crying out to God because I could not figure out how to write the salvation theme. It just wasn't working. And I'm like, my mind just, what happens when you get writer's block and your mind just goes blank and you can't write anymore?
So when I was doing Dash to Pieces, anytime I got to a scene with scripture in it, like a scriptural truth or something pivotal like that, it would literally be like there's a huge wall in front of me and I didn't know what to do. Yeah. And you'd have to like pray through that, and then usually it's because you're headed in the wrong direction. You have to turn and do something different.
Wait, you got to hear this.
Yeah.
So John Fornoff and I meet in my office, and I tell him, I want the salvation scene to take place on this scene. And he goes, no, that's not where it needs to be. And I said, but that's where I want it to be. I feel that's right. And he goes, no, it needs to be at the end. So let's take a look at it. And we go to the end. I'm like, I don't like it. I just don't like it. I want it to be back here. And so he goes, and then he gives in. He goes, okay, but if it's going to be there, then I would just kind of finesse it here. And so I'm really like, I'm convinced where it needs to be. I spend an hour writing, rewriting, having Sarah come up, listen to this. No, it's not very good. Shad, call him. No, it's not very good. I'm like, oh, Lord. And I finally just delete it all.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, let's just keep going. Let's see if it fits somewhere else. I get to the very end, exactly where John thinks it's supposed to be. And you heard it. It just was.
It was brilliant.
Perfect.
I was going to say beautiful.
It wasn't me. It was. I can take no credit for that whatsoever. It's as if God says, "Okay, you finally humbled yourself. Now I can use you." Set aside. I felt like God just kind of like took me out of my seat, and he just sat down and started typing it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's what it sounded like. So we get the script, and we have not looked at it. We don't know what it's going to be. We're discovering it as we're going, and we have 12 pages left, and the actor has to be on. Like in a car where we're like it's started.
Going to the airport.
He has everything's packed and he's got to like it's out there waiting for him.
The car's running. The driver's in it. His luggage is packed.
We have 10 minutes to do 12 pages. And then,
which is impossible.
Yeah. So then we've been like praying. And finally we're like, okay, we're just going to take these next few scenes. We're just going to do one. We're just going to go
take.
for it. And so then we start recording it and we're like, whoa, this like the script is beautiful. And then the actor's recording it and we're just like the students are praying behind us, the Masters Guild students, and we're praying up here. And then he says all those lines and two of the other actors in the scene, they end up redoing some lines, but he I don't know, he nailed it.
Yeah.
And so what first take, 6 o'clock, 6:05, he runs out the door. We all say goodbye, and then he's gone. And
cheering and
I was I did not know. I was like, God, can you do this?
Yeah, it was a miracle.
Pure faith.
It was a miracle, and it was in parallel to the story itself.
Oh yeah.
Isn't that something?
It was exactly because at the very end they're like, oh, an Arctic miracle or whatever.
Yeah.
And so we're recording. I was like, wow, this whole thing
Was a miracle.
is a huge miracle.
And that's what Jeremiah 17 is all about.
Yeah.
Jeremiah 17 is a reflection of what a true believer should be like. John, he ends his book in 1 John with, if you're a real believer, one of the things that you can count on, you can have confidence in, is you're going to get answers to prayer.
That's amazing.
Your prayer life is going to guide you. It's like the connection. Your prayers are your electrical connection between you and God.
What was it we heard on Sunday? It's like incense to God. It's when you pray, it's like offering up. Is that
burning incense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a beautiful thought.
Okay, so here we are. You asked the question, what caused Israel to backslide so far? In 1 John chapter 5, he ends his amazing letter with this unlikely, unexpected phrase. And it says this: little children, keep yourselves from idols. The end. It just ends like that. It's like, what? Where did that come from? That was Israel's main problem that they faced. They kept bringing new images for God. They had their Baals, they had their Asherahs, they had their Molechs. They kept copying the images of the gods around them, the nations around them. They felt like they needed that. And I was talking with someone this morning about the same idea, that our children are growing up with the same false images that Israel grew up with. They have the false images of, the superheroes. We have flooded our children with images. What was so funny?
No, yeah, I think we were talking about that.
Oh, you and I were talking about during the interview? Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about it here. I think it's important.
Yeah.
So, do you remember some of the things we talked about? What?
Yeah, well, we were talking about, so there's the image of God, and we're constantly, so when we're doing the audio dramas, we kind of flood people's imagination with these
reignite
stories.
the imagination.
Yeah, we were actually talking within context of there's this beautiful oasis that these boys find, and it's in the middle of this frozen tundra. There's been no hope or anything like that. They get over the hill, and there's just this beautiful paradise in the middle of nowhere. And so kind of the conversation that we were having was, you were talking about how you pictured that probably totally different than I did. And my imagination's going crazy with all this stuff that I'm thinking about, and your imagination's going crazy with all your stuff. And
because our imaginations are based on the books that we've read, the people that we meet, the experiences that we've had, and most importantly, our concept of God.
Yeah.
And most children today have zero concept of God. Their concept of God can go no farther than Spider-Man or Thor. That's as far as they. And the reason for that is because for them, seeing is believing. They can't believe in something that is that's beyond the sight of, beyond their view, beyond the eyes.
And I think something that you talk about quite a bit is with video games and movies and things, they're flashing these images and they're doing watching these things so fast, they don't really have to think for themselves. Right. And so that's something that you've talked about. Neil Postman talks about that in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Gina Redveith and Reading Between the Lines is one of the best books on it.
So I think in a huge sense, we're just getting lazy in our minds, thinking why would I have to imagine some of those things?
Yeah, readers are leaders, leaders are readers. We have to exercise the mind.
Good literature too.
What's that?
Yeah, good literature.
It's hard to find good literature. But you got to remember that the books that we read need to be evaluated based on the worldview of the author. And if you don't know the worldview of an author, I'd say stay away from it until you know it. One of the great classics, what's the French classic, Les Miserables?
Oh, yeah, Victor Hugo.
Yeah, so it's an amazing story. But when you get to know the worldview of Victor Hugo, you start to see what he implanted in that story. He was a socialist. He was influenced by Marxism. It's not the kind of story, even though it has this great redemptive moment in the end. That's not what the book really does to people, because they are not discerning enough to know what the worldview of the author really was.
Oh, yeah, and I don't think you can write anything without imbuing it with your worldview, for sure. Like, even just having a conversation with someone, you know that when they're talking to you, they're going to have a bias, whether they're aware of it or not. Like, if I talk to someone, like, I believe in Jesus, like, that's going to be subconsciously in everything I say and how I view things. And if someone's talking, they're like an atheist, or maybe they, you can see this a lot with writers who maybe have gone through some sort of trauma or something in their past, that like maybe abuse or whatever, that'll show up in their writings, that they can kind of have that bent. Ginny Owens, she's blind, and a lot of her music is filled with how she sees the world. And so it can be like that good or bad sort of thing.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's prevalent.
Yeah, so in order for children to have their imagination redeemed and restored, it has to take place with the worldview of God, that He's good, that He works all things together for good, that He keeps His promises, and that He will allow suffering for us to experience His love.
And grow our character.
Yeah, He's got to grow our character.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that happens for children is they got to get away from the bombardment of images that they're seeing on video games and Hollywood and movies,
Little
et
children,
cetera.
keep yourself from idols.
There you go. And that's what Israel was doing. They kept going back to their idolatry of making all of these idols.
So you have a definition for idol, right?
I would say anything that takes the place of God.
Yeah. Anything that you put above God in your heart.
Yeah.
That idea.
Yeah, and everyone has their hearts. They have a void in their hearts, and everyone tries to fill it with something. And so our idolatry could be, food. Our idolatry could be television. Our idolatry could be, I don't know, we could be overindulgent in having to have media, dominate our lives. We got to watch news constantly. There's something that we're constantly trying to fill ourselves with. It could be sex. It could be drugs. It could be pornography. Yeah, that's a big one today. And that's what Israel's problem was. They had two things going in their lives. They had the Word of God, the prophecies, and they had their idolatry. And so God is warning them, and they're saying, like, wait, what do you mean that we're going to be judged because we're not doing anything wrong? They were complacent in the type of lifestyle that they were living. They just didn't see it as sin anymore.
We were talking a little bit about that with the "is God good" idea, because if you reason that away, then you're making justification for your own immoral decisions. And so, like you said, you've got these two things pivoted against each other. They've got their idolatry and then God's word, and they can't have both, but they're like, I'll make it fit.
Yeah, I'll make it fit. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what they're doing. So God says, okay, Jeremiah 17:1, God says, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron. It's like, you're not going to believe me? He goes, this is how I'm going to write it down. You won't believe the words that I've written with pen and ink. So now I'm going to write my judgment upon you with a pen of iron.
Wow.
And guess where he's going to write it? With the point of a
diamond.
I'm going to make sure this time you can't miss the message that I'm trying to give you.
There's such a sense of urgency here.
Yeah. And I'm going to write this no longer on paper. I'm going to write this on the tablet of your heart and upon the horns of your altars.
Ooh.
He's going to judge them. Guess what they were doing on the horns of their altars? Sacrificing their children.
Oh.
Yeah. This is a time in Israel's history when they really believed that this sacrifice of their children was pleasing to God.
Was it God or was it a different God? Were they doing it to Yahweh?
They believed they were doing it for Yahweh.
Wow.
Yeah. But not really. I mean, you think you are in their mind.
Oh, yeah, but no.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Watch verse 2. While your children remember their altars and their groves by the green trees and the high hills. This is interesting. This could be taken two ways. Some commentators take verse 2 as you will remember the children that you've sacrificed on the altars, or that you have raised your children to partake in the same sin that you're involved in. So it's one of those two ways. Both are bad. Verse 3, God says, "Oh, my mountain in the field." That could be talking about Jerusalem. "I will give you your substance and all your treasures to the spoiler." So God's going to give everything they've got to spoil, to the spoiler and to the spoil. "And I'm going to give your high places for sin throughout all your borders." So God's going to just destroy everything that they've been counting on, everything that they've been enjoying. Verse 4, "And you, even yourself, shall discontinue from the heritage that I gave you. And I will cause you to serve your enemies in the land which you knew not, for you have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever." Boy, so God is what?
Mad.
Yeah, he is angry. He is fiercely angry right now with them.
Serious.
And he starts off with, you won't believe my words, the words that I've spoken, nor the words that I've written. Therefore, I'm going to write this with a iron pen with a diamond tip, and I'm going to engrave it in your heart, so you will get it this time. And guess what, Molly? 4,000 years later, or 3,700 years later, guess what Israel no longer does?
What?
They no longer have idols.
Oh, wow. Is it because of this event?
I believe it's because of all that they've gone through from this time forward, through the Holocaust, through everything that God has placed Israel through. God has completely cleansed Israel of all idolatry.
This is so crazy. Like, this is a huge struggle for them. Like, even back with Moses and everything, like, they just kept going back.
Yeah.
Why is this so rooted in them?
It's being rooted in the world because they kept staying close to the world.
Oh.
Same reason for the church today. The church is doing exactly the same thing.
It just looks different today.
I think it looks the same.
We don't have children sacrificed on
What's happening in
altars.
our public schools? What's happening in our churches? Our children are being sacrificed, not in a literal, physical sense, but we're sacrificing our children. Look at how children are being raised today. Gender confusion, all of the stuff that's being, prayer taken out of their lives, no concept of God. What we've done is we are adults, the politicians, the leaders, they're living their lives without any regard for the future of their children. They are sacrificing their children for their own benefit right now. So that's all they have in mind. This is an exact parallel to our culture today. Notice what it says next. "Thus says the Lord," verse 5, "Cursed be the man that trusts in man," and that goes back to Psalm 118, "and makes flesh his arm, whose heart departs from the Lord." So that phrase, "makes flesh his arm," he's depending on his own strength.
My translation has strength there.
Seriously? Oh, we both have the King James.
I
You
have
the new-
NKJV.
Oh, New King James.
Yeah.
Interesting. So when mankind starts to depend on their own strength, they disregard the Word of God, praying to God, and worshiping God. And they start depending on their own idolatry again. And that happens so fast and so easily and so undetectable, because we get into a situation where we get, we get depressed, disenchanted, hurt. And those hurts, we will either build walls so that we stay protected, or we fight and we want to hurt somebody else. That's what we do. Those are our two main.
There's got to be another option there.
Yes, the other option is wait upon the Lord and he will renew your strength. You will mount up with wings as eagles. You shall run and not be weary. You shall walk and not faint. You know what's interesting is that I've gone through a trial for 2 years now, unresolved, and it's been difficult. It's been in regard to the building of a house and all of the different codes and zoning and so forth that just some things that have just been difficult to get through, and some things that appear extremely unjust. And God has been teaching me something. In fact, just yesterday, one of my board members called me and said, what's God teaching you through all this? And I said, you know what's interesting? I said, I just read in Romans just 2 days ago, submit to those in authority, to all in authority in government. It's not just to the good, but it's to anyone that God places people in authority over us. And I don't know what God's truly trying to teach me in the end of all this, but right now He's teaching me submit to authority, good or evil. And don't submit to something that would make you deny God, or someone that would make you do something immoral or illegal. But God brings oppression. People look at the people of Ukraine right now, people in Russia right now, and in China right now. We still want to serve God and do the things that God wants us to do, but at the same time, we still have to obey the rulers that God's placed over us. And so God's teaching me to trust Him during this time and not to try to defend myself, not to try to fight myself. Important lessons. And here, this is really interesting. Verse 6, He says, this is part of His judgment, you're going to be like naked in the desert. What word do you have?
Like a shrub.
A shrub.
Like a shrub.
Oh,
in the
interesting.
desert.
The word shrub is the word for a shrub that it's either shrub or nakedness. It's a shrub without any leaves on it. It's just barren in the wilderness.
Like that Wild West scene with the little thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you shall not see look at this, Mal, you will not see when good comes, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness in a salt land not inhabited. That's a pretty desolate, future for them. And then all of a sudden He goes, blessed is the man, though, that trusts in the Lord and whose hope is the Lord. Like, that doesn't seem to fit, does it? You've got all this judgment, and then, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord.
It's beautiful.
Watch before you say beautiful. Watch what happens next. Ready? For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, that spreads her roots by the river, shall not see when heat comes, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought, neither shall it cease from yielding fruit. So 7 and 8 are beautiful. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord. You'll be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. I think he's quoting David.
Yeah.
But then in verse 9, the famous verse that we are all familiar with, the heart is deceitful above all and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Molly, why does that verse come right there in the context of blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord?
I don't know.
What's Israel doing?
They're not trusting in the Lord.
No, their heart is extremely deceitful and desperately wicked. They can't even understand what it means to trust in the Lord. They think they're trusting in the Lord. They think they've got all of these privileges of God. But at the same time, God's saying, like, you think you're trusting in the Lord. You think you're a tree planted by the rivers of water. You think that you have all of these things, but the heart is desperately wicked and deceitful. You can't even see what you're like. Watch what happens next. Verse 10. I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. This is still a chapter of judgment. This is not in the middle of this where He's saying like, but if you trust in the Lord, things are going to be great. He's not saying that. He's saying like, this is what you think. You think that everything is good in your life, but it's not. Your heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, and you don't even know it. And then God says, and I'm going to help you to understand what you're really like. I'm going to let you have your own way, and I'm going to let you bear the fruit of your own doings. I'm going to let other people see what you're really like. And then He gives this incredible illustration of the context. You ready? Verse 11. It's a very difficult verse to interpret. You and I have sat in the studio trying to figure it out ourselves, but I think we've got the gist of it. In the CEV version, it says, you cheated others, but everything you gained will fly away, like birds hatched from stolen eggs. Then you will discover what fools you are. Read me what you have in another version.
Sure. That is going to be Jeremiah 17:11.
Yep.
Okay. Like the partridge that hatches the eggs which she has not laid, so is he who makes a fortune in ways that are unjust. It will be lost to him before his days are over, and in the end he will be nothing but a fool.
So I think the best interpretation of this, in light of the context, so the context is that Israel has been going after the false gods of the nations around them. That's what's been satisfying them. That's what has been seducing them. And so they think they're all right. Nothing's really wrong. It'd be like people today, Christians today. It's like, they sit down and their life is just consumed with, TV. Their life is consumed with hobbies. Their life is consumed with just no real kingdom pursuits. There's no evangelism in their life. There's no real hard work, kingdom work going on in their lives. God has saved us to be a part of His kingdom and His righteousness. And He didn't save us to just have a safe life sitting at home. And so we got to ask ourselves, am I part of the kingdom, or am I part of my own safety net so that I can live my happy life and live my American dream? That's not what God saved us for. Mm-hmm. And that's what Israel's doing here.
I think that's a myth. I don't think it exists.
Interesting. Doesn't really, I don't know, Molly. I think there's some people very content.
But I don't think they're truly happy. I think you can sear the conscience and find a sense of joy.
Okay, so they're content, but they have no joy.
Yeah.
That's what I see. They have no real joy. The thrill of joy is, when you're really in the midst of the Spirit of God working miracles in your lives, in your midst, you've seen answers to prayer.
Well, I think it's a little bit characterized by growth, because I think people who get content and comfortable, cozy, you can have a great time, but there's not growth.
Right. Complacency.
When I was younger, I hated playing the piano. It was my least favorite thing of all things. And after about 3 or 4 years, I realized I hadn't grown in my skill level. I was still in kind of the same spot. And I was like, whoa, freaked me out a little bit. And I was like, well, why is this happening? Why am I not progressing? And I realized it's because I'm good at sight reading. So I would just sight read my way through things and not put in the time, not put in the work or the effort. And so I was sustaining. I was like, I could play the piano fine, but I was at a point where I just was stagnant and I wasn't moving forward like I should have been. And that's when I made the decision. I was like, okay, so either I'm going to persevere and get good at this, or I'm just going to stop.
Mm-hmm. And we should be asking ourselves that question in our Christian lives every year. Am I different than last year? Am I more self-disciplined? Am I more persevering? Do I have more of the knowledge of God under my belt? Do I have more joy? Am I kinder? Am I more discerning? Those are questions that we need to answer. This is an important time in Israel's history too, because they were totally unaware that they were stagnant. They were complacent, and they were involved in the sins of the nations around them. They didn't even know it was wrong. That's a terrible place to be, and a lot of people are stuck there right now. So God gives this amazing example of the partridge. The partridge will go and lay on eggs that are not hers, or steal them, it's called. She'll lay on eggs that are not hers, hatch them, only to find out when the fledglings are out, they realize it's not their mother, and they fly away. In the same way, Israel's been kind of holding on to things that are not theirs, that are not to be theirs. And as a result of the things that they thought were to bring them comfort, all of a sudden get up and leave. And all I can think of is people that have been enticed to think that this other relationship will be better for them, this other job will be better for them. And then all of a sudden they keep trying to find what's going to bring them true happiness, and it just leaves them. And there they are, stuck again, worse off than they were at the first. So, Molly, we placed this partridge theme example in the newest drama, Shipwrecked. And we did it because of Ivan. He kept thinking that he could be the
prideful, impulsive, conceited Ivan.
Yeah, and he was the commander of his own
ship, destiny.
His own destiny, because he had saw someone else that seemed to follow that same pattern, not realizing, I can't give it away, it was someone very close to him. But we put this in there because I think it's an obscure verse. Most people probably have never read this verse about the partridge holding on to things that are not rightfully his or hers, and as a result, they fly away. Like the things that we hold on to in the end, they're not there for us to support us. And so God is wanting us to completely be supported by him. And what he does is he uses a word in this that's very unusual. Take a look at it. It's in verse 10. I, the Lord, search the heart, and I try the reins. The word reins is the word for kidneys.
Oh,
I thought that would wake you up.
fascinating.
Okay. It's also the word for
Heart, mind.
no. Well, mind a little bit, but more, it's the word for appetite.
Interesting.
It's the word more particularly. You ready for this? I'd like a drum roll on this. It's the word for. It's the Hebrew word for kala, kidneys, but it's the seat of emotion and where your affections lie. It's the seat of your affections. So Molly, this word, if you understand this word, you'll understand everything that God's trying to reveal in chapter 17 of Jeremiah. He tries the reins. Okay, what does he try? He tries the reins, and he tries what else?
Your heart.
The heart. The reins, though, are where our affections are.
Oh.
It's the idea of kidneys, and the kidneys are our affections, and the liver is where the lust is. Each organ of our body connects with a different impulse.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, it's what the tradition teaches. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But this one is true. This idea of the reins of our life. What are the reins? What do reins do?
They steer, direct.
Steer, direct. Hold it in place. Stop it. Start it. You know, the horse.
Control the movement.
So the ancient word for reins carries the idea of the palm of someone's hand. The palm of someone's hand is what is used to subdue the will. It is the power. The hand reflects power. It is also the picture of a shepherd's staff. It is a shepherd's staff that's, when combined with the palm of hand and the shepherd's staff, it's the theme of taming an animal. That's what a shepherd does with a staff. He keeps a sheep going in the right direction.
Prodding them in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Keeping them from the wrong path.
It carries the idea of taming the yoke so that an animal will become usable. And we did that in the drama of Shipwrecked with the Reindeer. This idea of reining in, God testing the reins of our lives, has everything to do with chapter 17 and what Israel was doing. Their affections were outside of God. They no longer had their affections set on things above. They had their affections set on the things of the world. And as a result, God says, I'm going to test where your affections are, because where your affections are is where your heart is. And where your heart is what you're truly going to be worshiping. We worship the things where our affections tend to go more than anywhere else. And that's why John ends his chapter with, my little children, keep yourself from idols, because the idols are the affections of your heart.
You've been listening to Fastened Like Nails, a presentation of Lamplighter Ministries. Our mission is to make ready a people prepared for the Lord by building Christ-like character, one story at a time. To learn more about our family collection of rare books, dramatic audios, or guild programs, visit lamplighter.net. To hear more podcasts, search for Fastened Like Nails wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a question you would like to submit for the Lamplighter team, visit lamplighter.net/podcast and fill out the form. That's lamplighter.net/podcast.